Wyoming Territory, July 1879. The sun was already cruel by the time the auction bell rang in the center of Rawlins, cutting through the dusty morning air like a gunshot. Whitney Jane had never felt smaller than she did standing on that platform, wrists bound in front of her, chin lifted only because she refused to give the crowd anything more than what they had already stolen. Her blue dress was torn at the hem, her boots caked in mud from the long ride west in the back of a freight wagon. She was 23, a widow for 2 years, and now, thanks to the debt her late husband left behind, she was being sold off like a sack of grain to the highest bidder. "This young woman is hardy, obedient, and knows how to cook, clean, and mend," barked the auctioneer, his voice sharp above the murmurs of the crowd. "No children. No debts. Full ownership, gentlemen." Whitney's jaw clenched. She could taste the coppery sting of shame behind her teeth. Her gaze drifted beyond the crowd, over the restless horses tied to posts and the merchants watching from their porches. No one moved to stop it, until a single horse thundered in off the main road. The rider came fast, dirt flying, long shadows stretched like a ghost across the ground. A tall man in a duster coat pulled up hard at the edge of the crowd, his horse rearing slightly as he dismounted before his boots even hit the ground. He moved like someone used to getting between danger and the people he cared about. He tossed a leather sack onto the auctioneer's table with a heavy thud. "That should cover it," he said, voice low and firm. The auctioneer blinked. "Sir, we have not begun the bidding. I said that should cover it." The man turned to the crowd, hat low over sharp blue eyes. Even from where she stood, Whitney could see the dust on his coat, the leather worn around his gloves, the way the sun caught the edge of a scar down his jaw. "She is not for sale," he said. Silence stretched across the square. Whitney's breath caught. She should have felt fear, panic, confusion. But there was something in the way he looked at her, a recognition, like he had known her once in another life. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "That is more than her debt. Consider the exchange made." The rope around her wrists was cut. Whitney stepped down from the platform slowly, legs stiff, heart galloping. As she reached the man, she searched his face. "Do I know you?" He studied her a long moment. "You did once. I am Xavier Reddin." The name hit her like a windstorm. "Xavier?" Her voice cracked. "You were 14 when you left Alabama?" "I was 15. You used to bring biscuits from your mother's kitchen and sneak them to me through the fence." "God," she whispered, blinking fast. You joined the cavalry." "Deserted it," he said. "After I saw too much I could not live with." Her knees nearly buckled. "You just bought me." "No," he said. "I just paid off what they claimed you owed. You are free now." She stared up at him, stunned and shaking. "Why did you come?" "Because the last time I saw you, you were crying behind a barn and said you wanted to go west and never be owned by anyone. I figured if anyone deserved saving, it was you." Whitney could not speak. Her throat closed as he gently reached out and took her hand, careful like she might break. "Come on," Xavier said. "You need water. And shade." He helped her into the saddle of his horse, then swung up behind her. The crowd parted as they rode out, some muttering, others quiet. Whitney leaned back against him, too dizzy to make sense of anything but the warmth of his chest at her back. They rode north, away from the town, toward the low green hills beyond the river. He led her to a camp tucked behind a stand of pines, just a bedroll, a cook fire, and a canvas bag of supplies. He helped her down and handed her a canteen. "Drink slow." She sipped, then looked up at him. "You remembered me after all these years? I never forgot you." She sat on a log, hands trembling. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," Xavier said. "But you are safe now." That night, they sat by the fire, neither saying much. She watched the way he moved, silent, steady, like a man who had lost too much to speak of it. He never once looked at her the way the others had in that town. No hunger. No ownership. Just concern. Where will you go? He asked finally. I have no one left, Whitney said quietly. No family. No home. I have a claim near Medicine Bow, he said. Land I built up myself. I could take you there, if you wanted. She looked at him across the fire. Why would you do that? We were just children. You were kind to me when no one else was, he said. And I swore if I ever saw you again, I would not let the world ruin you. Her lips parted, but no words came. The fire cracked between them. Do you want me to leave? He asked. She shook her head slowly. No. I do not want to be alone tonight. He nodded once, then unrolled his extra blanket and laid it out near hers. I will stay close. But I will not touch you unless you want me to. Whitney lay back, watching the stars settle over the pines. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. The ache in her chest had dulled. The fear had eased. And as the fire crackled low, she turned her head just enough to see him lying there, hands clasped behind his head, eyes open. Xavier? Yeah? Thank you. His voice was soft in the dark. Always. The wind shifted at dawn, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth across the clearing. Xavier stood at the edge of the camp, cinching the saddle while the sky lightened behind him in streaks of pale amber. His shoulders moved slow and certain, like he'd done this every morning for years, no matter the weather or the weight he carried. Whitney rose from the bedroll, brushing dried needles from her skirt. She didn't speak right away. Her voice, like her hands, still felt unsure. But the silence between them didn't press like it used to. It waited, like a quiet room with the window open. You said you have land near Medicine Bow, she said, stepping closer. How far is it? 4 days if we ride steady, Xavier answered, checking the girth's strap. 3 if the weather holds and you're strong in the saddle. I can ride, she said, lifting her chin. I was raised on horses before I ever held a spoon. He glanced over his shoulder. I figured you hadn't forgotten. Whitney moved to help pack the last of the supplies. She folded the blanket with practiced hands, her fingers remembering the rhythm of work, even if her body felt worn thin. She paused only once, staring at the tin cup in her hand. You said you deserted, she said, not looking at him. What happened? Xavier didn't answer right away. He adjusted the cinch again, slower this time. We were sent north through Dakota Territory, he said finally. Told to clear out camps along the Knife River. They said it was necessary. That we were keeping settlers safe. Whitney set the cup down gently on the ground. I didn't understand what it meant until we got there. Women. Children. Old men. No weapons. Just families trying to outlast the cold. She didn't interrupt. Her breath was tight in her chest. I rode out that night, Xavier said. Took nothing but what I had on me. I've kept my head down since. Whitney stepped closer, her voice low. And no one's come looking? Maybe. If they did, they didn't look hard. I keep to quiet places. Hire out for fence work or cattle drives when I need coin. I built the cabin myself. No one but the postman knows I'm there. She studied him. You don't seem like a man hiding. I'm not. I just stopped asking permission. They rode out before the sun cleared the ridge, the horses' hooves muffled by the damp grass. Xavier kept a steady pace, guiding them along a narrow game trail that followed the river's bend. Whitney sat tall behind him, her arms resting light around his middle. She didn't speak often, but when she did, it was to ask about the land, the trees, the names of things she hadn't seen since leaving Georgia. By midday, they stopped in a clearing where the cottonwoods grew thick and the stream ran cold and clean. Whitney crouched by the water, cupping it to her lips. She glanced back at him, this time with something steadier in her eyes. You said you built the cabin yourself, she said. Did you build it for someone? Xavier took a seat on a flat stone. I built it for quiet. For a place to sleep without looking over my shoulder. No family? None left. My mother passed 3 winters back. Haven't heard from my brother since the war ended. Whitney lowered herself beside him, knees brushing his. Do you want to be alone? She asked. His gaze turned toward the trees. I thought I did. She didn't press. Instead, she reached into the saddlebag and pulled out the last of the jerky, tearing it in half and handing him a piece. Her fingers brushed his, and he didn't pull away. They sat under the cottonwoods until the shadows stretched long and the air cooled. When they mounted again, she didn't hesitate before wrapping her arms around him. Her cheek rested lightly between his shoulders, and her eyes stayed open, watching the path ahead as if she were memorizing it. That night, they camped beneath a bluff where the rocks held back the wind. Xavier cleared a space for the fire while Whitney gathered dry grass for kindling. She moved with more ease now, her hands less hesitant. As the flames climbed, she watched him from across the flickering light. My husband, she said suddenly, died of fever. He left nothing but debt and strangers knocking at the door. Xavier didn't shift. He held her gaze. I stayed because I thought I had to. Because I'd already lost too much to start over. You're not starting over, he said. You're just walking forward. She blinked once, then nodded. The fire cracked, and the night deepened around them. Whitney pulled the blanket tighter over her shoulders, but she didn't lie down. Not yet. Do you believe people can change? She asked. Xavier's answer came without hesitation. I believe they can heal. She looked at him a long time, then moved to sit beside him on the ground. Her knee touched his, and when he didn't move away, she let it stay. Either of them spoke again that night. They just watched the fire burn slow and steady, the silence stretching not as distance, but as understanding. The third day brought heavier skies and a hardness to the air that made Whitney glance west more than once. The trail had narrowed to a dry ridge lined with juniper and stone. Their horse moved slow, careful with each step on the uneven ground. Ahead, Xavier rode with quiet focus, his hand loose on the reins but his gaze sharp. By late afternoon, they reached a broad hollow where the land dipped into tall grass and low brush. Xavier pulled the horse to a halt and scanned the horizon before dismounting. We'll rest here, he said. Storm's close enough to wait out. Whitney slid down and walked a few paces into the open, her skirt brushing against the long stems. The grass swayed in the wind, soft and wild. She turned back to him with a faint crease between her brows. You always travel with this much care? She asked. He nodded once, tying off the reins. Learn not to trust wide country without stopping to listen first. What are you listening for? He crouched by the saddlebag, removing a folded canvas. Anything that doesn't belong. A hawk going quiet. A branch breaking wrong. Trouble doesn't always ride in on hooves. She said nothing, but her eyes lingered on him longer this time. They set the canvas between two broad rocks as cover. Xavier built the fire low, shielding it with flat stones to keep the smoke thin. Whitney gathered kindling without being asked, her fingers brushing over the rough bark as though relearning the shape of usefulness. When the rain came, it was steady but gentle. They sat under the canvas, the fire sputtering between them. Xavier passed her a strip of dried apple from his pouch, and she took it without hesitation. You always live alone out there? She asked, chewing slowly. I've had a few hands help through the seasons, he said. Drifters. One boy from Laramie stayed long enough to mend the barn roof, then moved on to Utah. No one else? He shook his head. I don't bring folks home unless I know they mean to stay. Whitney looked down at the apple in her hand. And how would you know? He didn't answer right away. Rain tapped the canvas in a rhythm like distant hoofbeats. Because they'd stop looking past the fence line, he said, and start asking what needed tending. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. Her gaze held his until the fire cracked between them. Later, after the rain moved east and the moon rose in a silver arc, Whitney stepped from beneath the canvas and walked to the edge of the clearing. The grass was wet under her boots, but she didn't seem to notice. Xavier followed a few moments after, watching her silhouette against the pale blue night. "You ever think about going back?" she asked, her voice low. "To Alabama?" She nodded without turning. He stepped closer but didn't touch her. "No. There's nothing back there I need. The land remembers too much." She turned to him then, eyes shining faint in the moonlight. "I still dream of it sometimes. The red clay roads. My mother's voice calling me from the porch. You miss her?" "Every day." Xavier's expression softened. "I think the ones we lose don't leave so easy. They just wait in the quiet places." Whitney blinked, and something in her eased, like a taut thread loosening. "I'm not afraid of work," she said. "I can cook, mend, keep a garden if the soil's half decent." His brow lifted slightly. "You saying you want to come to the cabin?" "I'm saying I've had enough of running," she said. "And I don't want to sleep under canvas forever." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then you come with me. As long as you like." She stepped closer, the space between them smaller now than it had been since that first morning. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't want to be beholden again, Xavier. Not to anyone." "You won't be. Then I'll ride with you." He reached out slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When she didn't flinch, his hand settled lightly at her elbow. "You've got strength in you," he said. "I saw it the moment you stepped off that platform. I didn't feel strong. Didn't matter. You stood straight anyway." Her breath caught faintly, but she didn't pull away. When they lay down that night, it was close, but not tangled. No hunger, no urgency, just steady warmth and the quiet understanding of two people who had been broken different ways. Whitney's hand found his beneath the blanket, fingers lacing slow, and he didn't let go. They reached the edge of Xavier's land by mid-morning of the fourth day. The sky stretched wide above the tree line, the clouds moving on in silence, and the early sun casting a golden hush over the hills. Whitney sat straight in the saddle, her hair pulled back beneath her hat, eyes scanning the land that rose and fell like something asleep. Xavier pointed with a nod. "Just past that ridge. Cabins tucked in the aspens." She didn't speak. She was watching the way a hawk circled to the east, steady and unhurried, like it had always known this place. They crested the last rise together, and there it was, a one-room cabin, square and weathered but standing firm, with a stone chimney and split rail fence marking off a small patch of earth. A lean-to barn stood nearby, roof slanted and patched, and a line of chopped wood waited by the door. Whitney dismounted without waiting for help. Her boots hit the ground light, and she walked forward until her hand touched the fence rail. She ran her palm along the grain of it, slow and thoughtful, like she was feeling the age of something. Xavier stayed quiet, letting her take it in. "Did you plant that?" she asked, motioning to a crooked apple sapling near the back corner. "I did," he said. "First spring I was here. Wasn't much more than a stick when I put it in the ground." She crouched near it, brushing a few weeds away. "It's trying," she said. "So was I," he answered. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and smoke. It was simple wood plank floor, a narrow bed, a stone hearth, shelves along the wall holding tinware and a few worn books. A table stood by the window, its surface smooth with use. There were no decorations, just function. But everything was clean, well kept. Whitney touched her fingers to the windowsill. "You built all this with your hands?" He leaned his shoulder to the door frame. "Took time. Had to teach myself most of it." She turned. "There's not a wasted inch. No room for anything that doesn't earn its place." Her eyes met his, and she held them there. "Then I'll earn mine." He didn't answer, but something in his expression shifted, not softened, exactly, but steadied. They unloaded the supplies together. Whitney moved through the tasks without hesitation. She folded her blanket, stowed the tinware, swept grit from the doorway. When she opened the root cellar and saw the shelves of preserved beans and dried meat, she nodded once and said, "We'll need more before the first frost." That evening, she boiled coffee while Xavier split kindling outside. She poured 2 cups and set them on the table, then sat with her hands wrapped around her own. He came in, brushing wood dust from his sleeves, and sat across from her without a word. She sipped, then glanced toward the hearth. "There's room for another chair. I can build one," he said. He watched her for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. "What do you want from this place, Whitney?" She looked down at her hands. "A roof that doesn't cost me my name. A man who sees me as more than what I've survived." Xavier didn't speak right away. He took a slow drink, then set the cup down. "What you've lived through matters," he said. "But it doesn't define what comes next." She looked up. "I don't want to carry you," he added. "I want to walk beside you." Something in her chest gave way, not broken, just made bare. "I never wanted someone to fix me," she said. "Only someone who wouldn't flinch when I couldn't hide it." "I won't flinch," Xavier said. She stood then, slow and deliberate, and crossed to his side of the table. He stood too, not reaching for her, just watching. When she placed her palm flat against his chest, he covered it with his own. "You're the first place that's felt steady in a long time," she said. "We can make it steadier," he said. "Together." She leaned in, then not rushed, not shy. Just sure. Her lips met his, and he kissed her back with the quiet certainty of a man who'd waited for the right thing and wouldn't let it slip through his hands. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his collarbone. He whispered, "You're not alone anymore." "I know," she breathed. Outside, the wind moved through the aspens, and the sky deepened into dusk. Inside, the fire burned low, and the two of them stood there, wrapped in something deeper than promise, something like belonging. The first frost came early that year, laying a thin white veil over the field behind the cabin. Whitney stood at the edge of the garden plot in her shawl, the cold biting through the wool as she studied the fading stalks. She crouched and dug her fingers into the soil, pulling the last of the turnips free before the ground hardened. Her nails came up black with dirt, and she wiped them down the side of her apron, watching her breath rise in the morning light. Inside, Xavier was sharpening the drawknife by the hearth, the rhythmic scrape steady as a heartbeat. He glanced up when she stepped in, her arms full. "Frost take much?" "Just enough to remind us who's boss," she said, setting the basket on the table. "But the potatoes held. And the squash." He wiped the blade clean and set it aside. "I'll nail the shutters tight this afternoon. If the wind shifts again, we'll be caught in it." She nodded, then turned to the stove, her hands already moving to light the kindling and fill the kettle. There was no need to ask what came next. They'd found a rhythm that didn't require speaking. As the kettle hissed, Whitney leaned against the counter and watched him sort through a bundle of tanned hides. "Where'd you learn to cure leather like that?" "Stock camp south of Cheyenne. Old man named Boone taught me. Said if a man can mend his own boots, he'll never have to beg another step. Smart man. He was. Mean as a thorn bush, but smart." Whitney smiled, her eyes soft. "You ever think about raising animals? Chickens, maybe? A milk cow?" He looked up. "If we can get that back pasture fenced come spring, a cow'd do fine. Chickens we could start sooner. I'll build the coop if you set the posts. I've got a good eye for keeping things out of reach. You'd do that? I didn't come here to sit idle." Xavier took her in for a moment, then crossed the room slow. He reached for her hand, turning her palm up between his. "I know," he said, voice low. "You've worked for everything you've got left." She met his eyes. "I don't want to be a visitor here. I want to belong." "You do." There was no hesitation in him, no flicker of doubt. She felt it in the way his hand closed around hers, not to hold her still, but to anchor her. They spent the next days settling into the season. Whitney patched the roof with pine pitch while Xavier laid in more wood for the hearth. She stitched thicker curtains for the windows from old flour sacks, and he built a latching door for the root cellar to keep out the cold. At night, they read aloud from the 3 books on the shelf, trading chapters in quiet voices while the wind pressed against the walls. One evening, as the fire burned low, Whitney reached into the drawer beneath the table and pulled out a bundle of cloth. She unfolded it to reveal a shirt Xavier's freshly mended, the cuffs repaired and the collar restitched. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I couldn't stand to see it fray any further." He took it gently, his fingers brushing over the seams. "You did this? You said there's no room for anything that doesn't earn its place." He looked at her with something quiet and lasting in his face. "Neither of us has to prove anything anymore." She stepped in, placing her hands on either side of his chest. "Do you still wake some nights, thinking you're somewhere else?" He nodded once. "Not as often." "I do," she said. "But now, when I open my eyes, it's your voice I hear first." He bent his forehead to hers, their breath mingling in the hush between words. "Then I'll keep speaking, until the night doesn't scare you anymore." When they kissed, it was with the bone-deep certainty of people who had witnessed the worst, and still found a way to offer kindness. It was the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything more than presence. The snow came heavy 2 weeks later, blanketing the cabin and cutting them off from the nearest town. But they lacked for nothing. Xavier tanned the last of the hides by the barn, while Whitney boiled down apples into preserves. In the evenings, they sat with their backs to the fire, her legs tucked beneath his arm resting behind her shoulders. They spoke of spring not as a dream, but as something they would build toward. A coop. A cow. A trellis for beans. He began sketching the layout for a second room, and she started gathering the seeds from what harvest they'd salvaged. One night, as the wind howled along the chimney and the fire cast long shadows across the floor, she turned to him. "I never thought I'd end up here," she said. "Not in Wyoming. Not whole." He brushed her hair back from her cheek. "You didn't end up here. You chose it. I chose you. And I'll be here every morning you do." They lay down together that night with no distance between them, no unspoken hesitation. The world outside was cold and wide, but inside the cabin, there was warmth that asked nothing but honesty. Years passed. The chickens came first, then the cow. Xavier built the second room with cedar from the ridge, and Whitney lined it with shelves of preserves and bolts of fabric. They grew beans, squash, and corn, and learned which corners of the land held the best sunlight. He carved her a rocking chair for the porch, and she hemmed curtains from her wedding dress, which they used to cover the pantry shelves. Neighbors came to know them as the Reddins, quiet but steady. Folks said if you passed their cabin at dusk, you could smell bread baking and hear two voices in calm conversation. No one ever called them lucky. They called them lasting. And when the apple tree finally bore fruit, they stood together beneath its branches, hands joined, and watched their land breathe in the season. Not with longing, or grief, but with peace. Always with peace.